Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be joined today by Alex Zhang. He's currently a group product manager at Nooks and originally joined as employee 50-ish as their first PM. Nooks is an AI platform building the agent workspace for go-to-market teams, designing agents that operate across the full sales action set from account strategy to prospect research and outreach. A year ago, they announced their Series B led by Kleiner Perkins. Prior to Nooks, Alex was a PM at Assembled and DoorDash. Alex, welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So you've worked at DoorDash, Assembled, and now Nooks. How would you describe the through line across those moves? Always love hearing how people got to where they are today.
Yeah, I think for me, I always wanted to start a company. That's always been like the North Star. And then the question is like, how do you get from there? In college, I started a food delivery startup. It was like with my brothers and like a couple of friends. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I was like doing some random stuff and it was like pretty interesting, but it wasn't like successful. And so I realized like, I had a lot to learn. So right after college, I joined DoorDash. I think one of the motivations was like, how do you learn what great product management is, like what
Mhm.
the bar is? And I think at DoorDash, I think it's one of the best, one of the world-class product works in the world and like how they think about product. I think the leadership team is super strong. So that was like how I thought about DoorDash. I'm happy to talk about it more, but like really looking what great product looks like. DoorDash at the time was like 10,000 people though. And I was like, oh, if I want to join a startup, I want to join a little bit closer to earlier stage of, what a startup would feel like closer to it. So I joined Assemble, which was like a Series B company. It was B2B SaaS at the time. I really didn't work in a SaaS and it's like just very different from marketplaces working at DoorDash. So joined Assembled. And then when I was working at Assembled, obviously like ChatGPT came out, like all these LMs came out. I was like, oh, I want to work at like an AI first company. So, and I'm joining Nooks. So that's sort of how I thought about it.
Awesome. And when you're thinking about your next move from Assembled, how did you go about the search process? Obviously, there are so many AI companies out there. Curious how you approach the search process broadly and how you eventually landed on Nooks as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at that time there was like there was like different verticals. So there was like support, sales, like on the AI application layer. There's like so many different verticals, and then obviously there's like the foundation models, and then there's like the horizontal things of like observability. So there's like these horizontal things and these vertical industries. For me
Mhm.
personally, I wanted to work on the application layer because I want to be closer to the user, effectively the end user, and so I wanted to work on the vertical. And then the question was like, what vertical to pick effectively? And then I think at that time when I was searching, there was like clear breakout winners in like certain verticals, right? So there was like Sierras that was like clearly like winning in that vertical. So like, I was thinking like whether to do that. And for what's worth, I went through some interview process, but I really wanted to go at like the next Sierra effectively at that vertical. And sales is pretty interesting because sales is like fundamentally human. Actually, just like when you sell to someone, it's a human to human conversation, and so it's pretty interesting thing. So I looked at Nooks. I actually got introduced to Nooks from Jesse, who's my friend. I actually played soccer with him, and he was like, "Oh, Alex, check out Nooks." And ultimately went through the process, and I thought Nooks had very high potential to be the next breakout winner in that given vertical, and we've been doing really, really well since I joined.
Moving into a little bit of context on what Nooks does, for someone who's never heard of Nooks, what does the product do today? What part of the sales process is it tackling today, and how is it making it better?
Yeah. So if you think about Nooks high level, it really helps folks with pipeline generation. So if you think about, hey, like you're selling, but you need to have like the pipeline to make the sales like downstream. So we really help with pipeline generation. So we're trying to increase the productivity of go-to-market teams to, 10x their productivity so that they can get more pipeline, right? So that's where we fit in. So we build agents to effectively turbocharge these humans to be more productive to generate pipeline. So that's where Nooks fits in. I think if you look at the sales stack of like the AI application layer of sales, like that vertical things, there's basically like three layers you can think of it. There's like the data layer, which is like all the CRMs, like, Salesforce, HubSpot, these like this like that's like one layer. Then there's like second layer of the intelligence layer, which is saying, hey, you have all this data, but how do you actually get signal to noise from this data? Like how do you get insights? That's the signal layer. And then
Mhm.
the top layer is the action layer, which is where like users spend the most time. And so Nooks really falls into the action layer. and the signal layer. So we basically help SDRs and AEs, these go-to-market teams, effectively take more action and then like be very smart about it with signal. So for example, our first product line was like the AI dialer, right? So we help people call, say 5 people at the same time. So we automate all the manual things of calling, right? And then once you start calling a lot more folks, you have a lot more conversations, right? Of like, hey, like tell me a little bit more about what tool you're using today, right? And then they will
Mhm.
be like, oh, I'm using some tool. And then basically you get that information and that feeds it as data as an input to signals. Because next time you make a call to that company, you actually can reference that data and say, like, oh, this is their current tech stack. And so there's a positive feedback loop between the action layer and the signal layer. So that's sort of high level how we think about it. But happy to talk more in detail how we do
Yeah.
this.
Super cool. Earlier, you mentioned how sales is particularly interesting to build AI and tech around because so much of the sales process is human. So I'm curious how you think about what parts to preserve or keep with the human versus what parts can be automated.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think how we think about it is on the human side, like we want humans to do only what humans do best, which is like having conversations. So if you think about pipeline generation, there's only like a couple of channels, right? There's like cold calling, emailing, LinkedIn, and like text messaging. Like those like the 4
Mhm.
channels. And we've seen that cold calling is the best channel, right? Like if you look at the best in class pipeline generation orgs, around like 60% of their pipelines generated through the phones. And so we really say, okay, humans should really focus on what they do best around film, like calling. And so we really want them to focus on that calling part, which humans do best. Everything else we want to automate. And sort of a metaphor you can think about it, sort of like imagine like an iceberg where like
Mhm.
above the water, you see that cold call. Like you might have gone to cold calls before and like you answered.
Mhm.
That's like what you see. And then below the iceberg is all the manual things that they need to do today to even get that first conversation, right? So like, what's that journey? It's like, okay, well, I need to find which accounts or which companies I should even reach out to. Then from there, I need to figure out, hey, what are the different people I should even reach out to? So if I'm selling like a product for like product managers, for example, I would have to say like, oh, for Nooks, I need to search for all the product managers and go with Alex, right? I'll do that.
Mhm.
And then from there, I need to find what's my contact information, what's my email, what's my phone number. And then from there, then I need to like take an action. So all that stuff is the manual process beneath the water, or that basically effectively the iceberg. And we use
Mhm.
agents to automate that. And then from there, let humans do what they do best is cold calling. And then on
Mhm.
the email thing, we also automate the email action because, AI can like generate very personalized emails that are actually faster and better than humans.
Yeah, super cool. And when you think about the transition from building a more traditional SaaS product during your time at Assembled to building an AI native product, what's fundamentally different, or what are some differences that you observed when making that transition?
Yeah. Good question. I'll have a contrarian take here. There's a lot of thought leadership of like, hey, how AI native things are different from SaaS. I would say like, I think fundamentally how I think about it, the job to be done for a product manager is to just understand what are the needs, like what are the problems of users. It fundamentally doesn't change whether you're building a B2B SaaS company, AI native company. It doesn't really matter. You just fundamentally need to know what is our problem statement, where are the users. And I think people overhype like, oh, I have to start like vibe coding as a product manager. And like that's like part of the job. You can definitely do that. But if you think about like where the highest leverage is, like what can you do that no other function can do? Or what is your superpower that you can do well? It's definitely to better understand the user. And there's a lot of nuance here of, I was talking to my team about this of like talking with users, interpreting their feedback. It's actually a very difficult thing. There's like books about it, like the mom's test. We did like a book club to talk about the mom's test to actually get good feedback. But so I think that's like the fundamental thing. I think the only big difference here is like if you think about like the problem space and solution space. So on the problem space, it's like talking with users, understand their problems. On the solution space side, I think very different from the AI native thing versus B2B SaaS is like just the constraints on the solution side basically have changed. Like before when you build software, there's no like, really like technology risk. It's like more like an effort thing. Now, when you build more of the AI native product, there's real feasibility and technology risk of like, hey,
Mhm.
what are the limits of the model? What's the quality? What's the trade-off between quality and latency? So those are the things you need to consider when you're building on the solutioning side. But before you even get solutions, it's really understanding the problem to be solved. And like, that has
Mhm.
never been more important. I would say it's even more important now with given you can just ship faster.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm curious how you think about translating what users say they want into that solution space. I feel like a lot of times when asking about their current workflow or potential pain points, I think they can kind of anchor on specific steps that they're doing today versus actually reimagining the workflow, for example. So, curious how you think about that or just translating what you're hearing to potentially more creative solutions that the customers wouldn't necessarily think of in that moment.
Yeah, to your point, what your job as a product manager is to like really understand the problem space, like what's the true problems. And then to your point on the solutioning space, now you can be much more creative and like actually how to solve it. So I'll give an example. The first project I worked on was on coaching. So our main users are SDRs. So what they are, like they're sales development reps. That's what SDRs stand for. And then what
Mhm.
they do is to focus on pipeline generation. So they do a lot of cold calling, they do emailing. Their goal is to book meetings for their account executives, right? So that's what like SDRs are primarily our users today. And one of the problems we heard was, hey, like cold calling is really hard, right? Like when you first cold call, I'm not sure if you've cold called before, but like if you cold call, you're like really nervous. You're like, oh my God, like what am I supposed to say? It's like very tough. I've done it before. And typically SDRs are like hired right out of college. They've never cold called before. And so the problem that we heard, or when I was talking with users, be like, hey, I want to have additional practice. I want to like train for my cold calls and do it. And they were talking about their current workflow. Their current workflow was like, hey, I practice with my manager today. Like
Mhm.
I one-on-one practice. And then the problem is like managers are busy. So that was like sort of like the current problem statement. And then with AI, you can be very creative with solving that problem. Now, before, without AI, how do you really solve that problem? It's like pretty interesting. How do you even think like how do you get software to solve it? It's hard. But then now with AI, you can have very creative solutions, right? So we built like a coaching bot, a training bot. And how that works is basically you can configure the bot to match the persona of or the type of personas or the type of objections or type of competitors that your real prospects typically say. And basically there with this bot, you can basically have a real back and forth conversation simulating effectively a real prospect. And so like behind the scenes, right, we just have like LM and then there's like different prompts that you can do to basically simulate a real conversation. And so that enables you to solve that problem in a very creative way. And
Mhm.
reps really, really loved that because that way they can practice by themselves, practice with the bot themselves, and they're not bottlenecked by their manager. So that's like one
Mhm.
example of solving that problem.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm curious when you go about debugging the product, how, like, when something seems like it's not working, how you figure out what the problem is. Because I think sometimes it could be a product or design issue, sometimes it could be a model limitation, could be, of course, something else. Assume, though, that you're solving for the right thing and it's just like a solution issue. Like, how do you go about figuring out where the problem is?
Yeah, it's a good question. So like take the example of like the bots again. So one of the things, like the biggest thing that we had to work on was how do you make it realistic? How do you make it realistic so people actually want to talk with the bots, right? And one of the things like that we did was like if you look at the realism of the bot is like two different ways. There's like the prompt and like the model. I think that's like high level how you can think about it. And there's like other aspects of like realism as well, but I think those are the big parts. One of the things that we did at the very beginning, this was like a year and a half ago when GPT was the leader and everyone was using
Mhm.
like GPT and we were trying to give it instructions of like how to follow it. And like what would happen was like GPT was like way too nice. The bot was like way too nice. You would say like some stupid stuff and like the bot wouldn't
Mhm.
hang up on you. Like on a real call, if you say something dumb, like they're gonna hang up on you. And it wasn't too realistic because it was like too nice. And we were playing around with the prompt a lot. We were like, be like a drill sergeant, don't be nice, and like all these
Mhm.
instructions to make it like more mean and just wouldn't follow those instructions. And we tried a lot with the prompting, so we just tried that. And then from there, engineer on the team was like, "Oh, like let's try like Anthropic's model." So we tried at times Sonnet, and people just weren't using it. Like people were using ChatGPT more, but we were just trying it.
Mhm.
We did like similar instructions but different, and it was like totally different. It was like way too rude actually on the other side. It was great because we were able to tone it down. And so
Mhm.
trial and erroring is the big one. And once you start using it, there's a lot of like second order consequences of it too, like latency. So what
Mhm.
happened is like once we started using Sonnet, basically the latency increased a lot. So what happened is you would talk to the bot and the bot would like delay for like 2 seconds and then reply to you. So we had
Mhm.
to figure out how do we reduce latency then, right? If you break down the latency, there's like the model, the prompt, there's like different third-party providers we used. And so we really needed to shrink the latency of other parts. So you just test real use cases and like you just try the prompt, the model, and like reduce latency. I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think you just have to try
Yeah.
it on the test. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Another thing I'm curious about is I feel like these days, because it's quicker to build features, the product surface areas of various companies are expanding more quickly than before. So, in the past, companies would spend years on the first act, kind of that core product before figuring out the second product and so on and so forth. And now it feels like everyone is expanding their product surface area at a much quicker rate. So would love to hear more about how you guys have thought about expanding the product surface area, whether it's, deeper into the existing workflow of the persona or even expanding to other personas as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah, I talked to Rohan, the co-founder. He's like head of product. I work very closely with Rohan. So if you look at where we first started with our AI dialer. That's like our flagship product. As I mentioned before, we help you automate all the manual things when cold calling, which is like we help you
Mhm.
cold call like 5 people at the same time and automate that work. So that's where we started. If you look at the stack on the sales side, there's like a lot of different parts of the stack. There's like, calling is at the very top of the funnel, which is assuming you already know who to call, like you have the numbers, all that stuff, then you like call, and calling is like the last step. And so if you think about where we've expanded in terms of the product, right, we started with coaching, which is above that stack, which is like, hey, assuming you actually cold call, you want to get better. So then you want to like train or coach. So that's above that stack on the layer. So
Mhm.
that's the coaching layer. And then we're like, okay, well, before you call as well, there's a sequencing tools, which is like, hey, if you have 10 people, it's like a list to be like, day one, you should call this person. Day two, you should call. So basically, it gives you like a list of tasks to do effectively.
Mhm.
And that's like downstream of the dialer effectively. And so we expanded to that recently called AI sequencing. So if you look at like adjacency, so we've been like starting here, we've been expanding above and below effectively in terms of the stack. And I think in terms of your question on personas, we've always focused on this SDR persona and a bit
Mhm.
of really consolidating the stack around this SDR persona and automating the work effectively across the board. And then now we're trying to expand to like AEs as well or account executives. So I think that's how we think about
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. And then shifting a bit to your experience growing with the company. So you joined as first PM about 50-ish people. How big is the company today?
It's a good question. We have like 250, I think.
Oh,
250.
wow. Okay, so you've kind of seen the company grow 5x since you joined. I'm curious how your role has evolved as the company has grown.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think when I first joined, I was hired as a first PM. I was like IC, and we were expanding product line. So had the AI dialer, and then we had a new suite called AI coaching, which I mentioned before. When I first joined, it was like we just built this at like a hackathon. It's like a very, very new product. We had sold to like one customer already, and like we were really the job we done was like going to market with this new product and like figuring out what to build, who we're building for. So it was like sort of like a startup within a startup, which is like pretty interesting. So I was leading that. I did that for like 6 months. And then from there, I worked on another 0 to 1 bet. So I basically worked on all the 0 to 1 bets since
Hmm.
joining. So I worked on coaching for like 6 months. And then I worked on like a product line called AI prospecting at that time too. And the whole part of that product was to like, automate the whole finding who to reach out to. And it was pretty interesting because at the time, that product actually didn't work out. We actually got killed that product line in like 6 months. And
Yeah.
then from there, I'm now leading product for AI sequencing, which is our new product line, which is like doing very, very well. We've grown extremely fast. And from there, I transitioned to a manager now. So I have like 3 PMs that that I hired recently to onboard them. I'm hiring another PM now. So it's like, now more of a management role there as well. And then I also work much more closely with Rohan and like different co-founders to figure out like
Hmm.
what best to choose, right? And so I work pretty closely with them on the company and product strategy. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. You mentioned the AI prospecting bet that didn't end up panning out in the, I guess, dream scenario. I would love to hear more about that. Looking back now, like hindsight is 2020. What was different maybe from the original hypothesis?
Yeah, so I think the original premise of it was like a very simple premise, which is like, hey, it was like the rise of agents, and you're saying, hey, before I'd manually find which account specs to focus on. So like the problem statement was like, imagine I'm an SDR and of 1,000 accounts. like 1,000 companies I can reach out to. You have to
Mhm.
manually figure out which accounts are the best fit accounts. Like I have to do research on these accounts, figure out what are the accounts I should actually target. After I figure out which companies to target, then as I mentioned, you have to figure out which prospects to reach out to. And then you have to enrich that data to find their phone number, email, and then only then can you actually call them. So you have this manual thing of like, why can't this be automated, right? You're just like finding which the best like accounts and then the prospects and like enrichment, like AI should be able to do this, where agents should be able to do this. And so the premise was, how do we automate that entire manual workflow, right? So that was like the premise of AI Prospector. It hits the name, which is like automating the prospecting thing. What it turned out to be is two things. The way I think about product, there's like different risks. There's like value risk, which is like,
Mhm.
hey, like, are you solving a true problem? And then two, which is like our market size, like how big of a market is this? What it turned out to be is that the market or the problem we're really trying to solve is like only for reps that had a lot of books and a lot of accounts in their name, which is 1,000
Mhm.
accounts that they could actually reach out to. A lot of SDRs only have 200 accounts or 100 accounts or 150 accounts. And what it turned out to be, because they only have so little accounts, or like 200 accounts, they
Mhm.
already reached out to a lot of them. So they already know which accounts are good or bad. So they didn't really have a problem related to that. They didn't really have an account prioritization problem. And so it turned out to be the market for reps with 1,000 accounts were much smaller than we actually anticipated with the problem we're solving. And so that was one, the market was too small. And then two is around how we deployed it was a very like forward deploy model. I know forward deployed is like very hot these days. And so we were
Mhm.
like having like folks in our side forward deployed to basically set up this AI prospecting, because every company has their own motion of prospecting. So you have to be very custom to that given company. And we did forward deploy motion, but like what it turned out to be, there was so much setup that we had to do on our side, and it wasn't configurable by the customer. So we were like the bottleneck, and we basically effectively had to replicate their prospecting motion. And there was just so much setup needed that wasn't flexible enough, because people wanted to change and iterate them and change, tweak themselves, but they couldn't be able to do it. And we were sort of the bottleneck. So I think the market was too small. I think we built it, in a forward deploy way where like we were the bottleneck, which was not good. So those are the two key risks. And
Mhm.
we couldn't go to market as fast as we want and acquire as many customers as we want. So we're like, hey, let's do some other bets. And that's sort of like how we
Yeah.
landed. Yeah.
Cool. That makes sense. Super clear articulation of the kind of main factors looking back. And I think that is a risk with the forward deployed model as popular as it is today. If ultimately that function is the bottleneck, I do think it makes it hard to set the company up for future success. So that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Well, I'd love to transition to the last little section, which is a rapid fire. So I'll ask a couple questions and you will just say whatever comes top of mind. Awesome. What are three emojis that describe your time at Nooks?
Free emojis. Oh God. I don't really use emojis. I'll cop out. I'll say three exclamation marks. Three exclamation marks. I think it's been a good ride. Like we've been moving fast. And so, yeah. Yeah.
That's a good emoji. I do use that one sometimes. The double red exclamation
Yeah.
mark.
Yeah. Three exclamation marks. Yeah.
And what is your favorite AI tool you use that is not Nooks? I mean, you wouldn't use Nooks anyways for your role, but
Yeah. It's granola. Granola has been number one. Very good product.
yeah, granola has gotten a lot of love. I think someone else also shouted it out. So
Yeah.
good on them. And what would be your top pieces of advice for people looking to join an early stage startup?
I see. Is this product or just in general?
Let's do for product.
Yeah. I think what happens in product at startups is you won't learn best practices because it's like pretty scrappy, right? And so what I would recommend is to join a bigger company like that has a good product culture. Like there's a lot of big companies that are very poor of product culture. So I would recommend joining a big company that has a very good product culture. Like for example, DoorDash, I would say has a very good product culture. There's a couple other ones. I think Meta is a pretty good product culture, and learn from that. And it will set you up for success when you join a smaller startup. I think it's really tough to join as a PM at a smaller startup because you don't know really what you're doing and no one's like really going to train you. I think one of the reasons I've been pretty successful in Nooks is because I know what good looks like, but if you don't know
Mhm.
what that is, it's in general going to be pretty hard to be successful.
Yeah. And last question, if you weren't in tech, what would you be doing?
Good question. I think in an alternative universe, I'll probably be a soccer coach. I like to
Oh,
play soccer,
nice.
and
Yeah.
yeah, like getting the best out of folks. So I like
Mhm.
probably like soccer coaching
Yeah.
for me. Yeah,
Well, the
maybe.
closest you're getting now is with the AI coaching product. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Alex. This has been really fun and appreciate your time.
Cool. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Early Access, and thanks to Alex for sharing so many of his insights and gems. Stay tuned for the next episode.